Well, as we were talking about earlier, Donald Trump has been making a big promise to the nation's service workers at his recent campaign rallies. If they send him back to the White House for another term, he'll see to it that the restaurant servers and other tipped workers no longer pay taxes on their gratuities. How do you suppose he's going to do that? Because you kind of need Congress to do that. Donald Trump can't just make I don't even think he can do an executive order on that sort of thing. Um, but that's what he's promising. And he's promising this because he's currently in desperate straits. He knows he has little chance to win, so he's got to do anything to get people on his side. But will that work? I doubt it. No more taxes on tips, the former president declared in Detroit on Saturday, reiterating a pledge he first made in Nevada. But there are at least two reasons not to take Trump's pitch all that seriously. For starters, not even Republicans are ready to embrace the tip idea after Trump personally pitched it to them during the meetings last week. The proposal would add cost and complexity to the GOP tax plan for the next year when Congress will grapple with a host of expiring tax cuts for households and businesses. I think that has more to do with the Electoral College in Nevada than any other policy that's been vetted. Representative Richard Neal of Massachusetts, top Democrat on the House Tax Committee, told the Huffington Post. The other cause for skepticism is Trump's own record as president. When he had a chance to help restaurant workers, Trump instead pursued a controversial policy to give employers more control over those workers' tips. The proposal was designed to allow restaurants to pool their servers' gratuities and redistribute them to non-tip workers like dishwashers and cooks. But it was written in such a way that it appeared nothing could stop businesses from appropriating those tips for themselves. See, that's the ironic thing about Republicans. They will say that we want to take government out of your lives. We want smaller government. But everything they're doing is about government controlling your life, overturning Roe v. Wade. Um, this proposed idea about tips. They're now saying they don't want to tax your tips, which is fine. There's a lot of things they shouldn't tax. They shouldn't be taxing Social Security. We already were taxed on that money coming in that we paid out into Social Security. And now when we take it out again, we have to pay taxes on it again. We're paying twice on taxes there. Would it be great if the people who got their tips non-taxed? Yeah, it'd be great for them. And I'd like to see servers do better. They've been fucked over. But you know who should be making sure servers do better? Is the people that hire them, their employers. They pay them shit wages and say, well, you'll get great tips, and let somebody else carry the water for their employees. Now, Trump officials buried an internal analysis that showed tip workers could lose billions of dollars a year in wages under the plan. This is going to take all the control of the tips that I make and hand it over to the owners, as an Illinois server fumed to Huffington Post at the time. Congressional Democrats felt it was necessary to insert a provision in a spending bill barring employees from pocketing their tips. And that's a real thing. I know people that work in the service industry, and getting fucked over on your tips is a pretty regular occurrence. Now, the Democrats failed to stop a separate Trump policy change for tip workers. The rule made it easier for employers to pay tip workers a sub-minimum wage, as little as $2.13 per hour for non-tipped work, like mopping a restaurant's bathroom floors. A Labor Department analysis projected that servers would end up spending more of their time on low-wage duties. President Joe Biden reversed the key portions of the rule after he assumed office. Now, Sharon Block, she's a labor professor at Harvard Law School, also a former Biden administration official, said that was nothing in Trump's record to suggest a desire to improve the lot of service workers. She noted in an email that Trump never tried to raise the federal minimum wage while he was president. The standard rate of $7.25 an hour hasn't budged since 2009. And the reason it hasn't budged in 2009 lies solidly at the feet of the GOP. The Republicans are the ones that have held back the minimum wage raise. Now, Block said, my first reaction is that no one should pay any attention to this Trump proposal. If Donald Trump cared at all about service workers, he would have supported raising the minimum wage, but instead he courts support from corporations who have lobbied to keep the minimum wage at $7.25 per hour. Several Republican members of Congress told Huffington Post that a tax break for tips was one specific policy that Trump seemed most interested when he met with lawmakers on Capitol Hill last week. Under the current law, tips are treated the same as regular payroll wages for tax purposes. Employers reported that workers earned more than $38 billion in tips in 2018, according to the most recent IRS data, compared to more than $6 trillion in regular payroll wages. In addition, workers likely earn billions more in tips since gratuities are often paid in cash and not reported to the government. I tell you that, my wife is adamant about it. Whenever we go out to a restaurant, which is frequently, we might pay with a card, but we always pay the tip in cash. That way we make sure that the person who deserves it gets it. And if they want to claim it on their taxes, cool. If they don't, we don't care about that at all. But we're also hearing that this tax cut would end up costing the United States of America like $250 billion in lost revenue. So this is Donald Trump just pulling something out of his ass. Like I say, he's flailing. He will say and do anything because he knows he's losing ground every day. All right, you may have seen or heard about these videos about Joe Biden allegedly freezing up on stage. What it really was a highly edited video to make Joe Biden look bad. And it didn't take long for people to expose that and realize that it is just another phony put-up job by the Republicans. Now, the White House on Monday criticized Republicans for spreading videos showing Joe Biden's mental and physical decline, saying the images had been deceptively cut and manipulated. Now, the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, says it tells you everything that we need to know about how desperate Republicans are here. She told reporters, branding the clips as cheap fake videos. Outlets, including the New York Post and official Republican social media account, have shared several seemingly damning short videos in recent days of the 81-year-old president. In one video, an apparently disoriented Biden appears to wander away from fellow leaders while watching a skydiving display during a G7 summit in Italy last week. But Jean-Pierre said the footage was misleadingly edited. And Biden instead was moving to give a thumb up to parachutists. This was widely fact-checked, including by conservative media. She said at a media briefing, adding, if you run that tape a little bit longer, then you see what was happening. Earlier in the week, NBC also debunked the claim, posting footage caught by its own cameras from another angle online, which showed Biden interacting with parachutists just a few feet away. Another widely shared clip was a close-up shot of Biden standing still as world leaders danced close to him during a concert at the White House, which opponents said showed a state of confusion. The president stood there listening to the music and he didn't dance. Excuse me, I did not know dancing was a health issue. I will tell you this, my wife and I will have occasion to go to concerts. My wife is a dancer. I am not a dancer. We'll be at the concert and people all around us will be dancing and going crazy, and I'll just be standing there and she'll look at me like, what the fuck's wrong with you? Now she knows I'm just not a dancer, man. I have no rhythm. I'm terminally white. I literally have no rhythm, and I don't fancy myself a dancer. So I instead sit there or stand there and enjoy the music and let the other folks dance. And I can promise you, I don't have any diminished cognitive skills, not yet anyway. Now, on the weekend, the New York Post again shared a video, excuse me, showed a video appearing Biden got lost on stage during a fundraising event in California before being pointed to an exit by former President Barack Obama. Seems to me that George W. Bush actually did that one time, didn't he? Andrew Bates, another White House spokesman, said on X that Biden was instead waiting on stage to appreciate the applause from his supporters. And Eric Schultz, a senior Obama advisor, posted a link to the Post article on X, writing, "This did not happen." These people are so desperate they'll take ridiculous things and try to post them as if they are real or true. And the problem is that that they just aren't, and they're easily debunked, but they still do it. It just goes to show just how truly desperate these fucks are. Now, there is a Republican strategist that fears that the presidential debate rules won't have any real impact on Donald Trump. Of course, that's a Republican strategist. You know it will, because we know what Donald Trump's strategy is when it comes to debating. He talks loud and long, he overtalks people, and with the mic turned off, he can't continue to talk. Now, that's not to say he might still rant and rave after the mic is turned off, but it paints a pretty desperate picture. Speaking to MSNBC on Monday about the upcoming event on CNN, host Jose Diaz-Balart asked Susan Del Percio about CNN's plan to mute microphones to prevent the candidates from shouting over each other. Del Percio also pointed out that there won't be an audience for the first debate, which he said will likely be frustrating because both debaters like to play off crowds. Also, with the muted mics only allowing them to be on when they're speaking, it will pose another challenge, she continued. Donald Trump isn't going to shut up just because the mic is muted. I think he will do everything he can to try to rattle Joe Biden, and I hope Joe Biden's ready for that, because even if the rest of us can't hear it, my guess is there will have been some kind of outtake moment from the debate from all of what Donald Trump said when the mic wasn't on. I'm not worried about Joe Biden in this situation. He knows very well what he's headed into. He knows how to deal with Donald Trump. We saw him in the debates the first time around. Like when he said, "Why don't you just shut up, man?" I don't think Donald Trump's going to be able to rattle Joe Biden. But I'll tell you this, Donald Trump is going to get rattled. He is going to be asked questions by the moderators, not Joe Biden, and he's going to be expected to answer. And when he does answer, he's going to look foolish because he doesn't know anything. He's not capable of doing anything. Now, over the weekend, Trump demanded that Biden take a cognitive exam, though he then couldn't remember the doctor who administered the test to him 6 years ago. The former White House Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who's now a congressman and has spent years promoting Trump and Trumpism. I think that's Donald Trump just trying to use probably the only thing that really shows the two men in an appearance issue between them. That is age. It's a very real thing. But when you blow it like that, Donald Trump just shows he's also not qualified because, frankly, maybe Joe Biden stumbled a little, but at least he's not unhinged, Percio said. And that's the thing, is when he shows up, on screen and he's asked very specific questions and he just cannot answer them. And he goes off on tangents like boats in the ocean and Hannibal Lecter and that sort of shit. It's going to be pretty obvious. I mean, I think people are seeing it already in the rallies and such that Donald Trump can't keep track of what he's saying. It's just everybody wants to say, "Oh, this is going to be close." I don't think it's going to be close any more than the election is going to be close. Everybody seems to want to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. Like when Donald Trump says, "Oh, I raised 140 million after I got convicted," even though we caught him last month lying about it. You still believe him. The fuck is wrong with you? Now, there's an author of a new book on Donald Trump's reality TV show, The Apprentice. He said the former president has nursed years long grudges in spite of clear memory issues. The name of this gentleman is Ramin Satuda. The co-editor in chief of Variety interviewed Trump 6 times for the book Apprentice in Wonderland between May 2021 and November 2023. And he told MSNBC's Morning Joe that reality show was wholly responsible for the failed businessman becoming president. Yeah, he was going to be canceled. This is the reason why Donald Trump became president of the United States. This is the reason why he is now the nominee and could become president of the United States again. I think the important thing about this book, what I want everyone to know, it is based on a lot of access to Donald Trump. I interviewed him starting in 2021. As a journalist, spent more time with him than any other journalist since he left the White House on the record. We talked a total of 6 times. We're sitting together in the boardroom at Trump Tower watching clips of The Apprentice together. And yes, this is the show and the warped reality we all live in, but it's also a president in exile. Now, this author told Joe Scarborough on MSNBC that the ex-president remains fixated on Joe Biden, which makes a lot of sense. Joe Biden beat him. And as a narcissist, that's something he just cannot accept. Nobody can beat a narcissist, but Joe Biden did. So that would explain why he's fixated on Joe Biden. Now, the author goes on to say Trump's mental temperament after the White House, his fixation on revenge. Joe, he's still fixated on you, said the author. He spoke in detail about an interview you did in 2015. Lawrence O'Donnell was questioning on how much money he made off The Apprentice. Most presidents, post-presidencies, are thinking of happier thoughts, moving on with their life, but he was remembering every negative thing anyone has ever said. This book is also a warning. Donald Trump knows how to use the media. He's never been taken out. People keep saying, okay, Trump era is over, but he won't leave because he's a reality star. Reality stars really know how to captivate the audience. Trump frequently accuses President Biden of suffering from AIDS-related cognitive issues. But the author said he was alarmed by some of the former president's behavior. He says, I got to know Donald Trump post-presidency, got to see what he was like. Over the weekend, he was talking about how Joe Biden needs to take a cognitive test. Joe Biden isn't all there. Donald Trump had severe memory issues. As the journalist who spent the most time with him, I have to say he couldn't remember things. He couldn't even remember me. We spent an hour together in 2021 in May. Then a few months later, I went back to Trump Tower to talk about his time in the White House. I said, you know, he had this vacant look. I said, do you remember me? He said, no. He had no recollection of the lengthy interview we had, and he wasn't doing a lot of interviews at the time. The American public really needs to see this portrait of Donald Trump. This shows what he's like and who he is and who he has always been. I think we're starting to see it in some of the video clips and the rallies and that sort of thing. Donald Trump is in mental despair. I mean, like I said before, he's 78 years old. He's not the healthiest mentally and or physically. And then you throw on top of him all the pressures that he's got. 34 felony charges, more to come. His money being taken away. He's not having the same impact on supporters, so his fundraising is lacking. And all the while, he's running for president. An average healthy young man would have trouble with that kind of stress. As I've said before, the only thing that might be benefiting him is that he's fucking delusional, that he maybe doesn't realize how bad it is or just refuses to accept how bad it is. but um, it's bad. And when he does realize it, this guy's going to fall apart. And that's one of the many reasons why I'm not so sure that he's even going to be the nominee. Can he hold out until November? As far as I'm concerned, he's lost it already. Um, uh, it's just too much for any human to handle. And now maybe Donald Trump isn't human. I don't mean that in the literal sense, but the way he thinks, the way he handles things. Now, somebody else had some input too. Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, is also a psychologist. Mary Trump thinks her uncle Donald Trump is marching the United States into a death spiral. Well, I would say that's probably true if you had any chance of winning, but I don't think that's true. In her latest newsletter, The Good in Us, Mary Trump tackles the dire consequences should the former president regain the White House. In The Leader of the Pro-Death Party, it's not just the guns. Mary, a psychologist, reflected on the Supreme Court decision to overturn the ban on bump stocks in the Trump era regulation. That's what you have to remember. The bump stocks, as much as the Supreme Court has turned them over in favor of the Second Amendment and the Trump-a-fucks, it was Donald Trump who pushed to have that ban put on because it was the popular thing to do after this shooting. It was a reaction to the 2017 Mandalay Bay massacre in Las Vegas, where the shooter's weapon killed 58 country music concert music festival attendees and literally injured hundreds. And of course, that shooter utilized bump stocks. The effort, which Mary called one of the very, very few decent things the Trump administration had managed to accomplish, shot to shelve rapid fire gun add-ons that manipulate rifle stock so that when a trigger is pulled, the recoil is seamless, giving the shooter the ability to fire a steady stream of bullets. She then turned the screws on the 45th president for failing to handle the reversal like a dignified leader. Well, for the first time in a long time, he said he respects a court decision, she writes. Then he bragged about getting the NRA's endorsement. This supposed sportsmanship to court votes in the face of what she deems a failure by the highest court in the land shakes her to the core. As horrified as I am about the court's decision, I'm very horrified. I'm also grateful to them for making it so clear what the election in November is all about. It's life and death. Now, Friday's decision and Donald Trump's response to it were powerful reminders that the leader of the Republican is the death candidate, and her fears go beyond Trump's cynical embraces of weapons of war. Mary writes about how her uncle, as a leader of the free world, has already shown his calculated decision to play rounds of golf and brag about television ratings while there's a global pandemic. Politically, Mary accuses Trump of killing the Republican Party, or at the least the sense of patriotism, decency, and shame, which she notes is hardly a great loss. There's also the concern for Mary about abortion rights and pollution that could do more damage to the women and the environment. Nobody, I won't say nobody, but Mary Trump knows a lot about Donald Trump, his past, and how he's thinking now. She happens to be a psychologist and goes along with the things I've said. This is a man that has some seriously deep emotional problems. And he says the most outrageous things, and there is a certain faction of people that buy into it, that believe it. And therein lies the problem. These people are ill-advised, maybe not very bright, and they decide to support a man who works against their own best interests. That's the surprising thing about Donald Trump and his effects on the people that follow him. It's really frustrating when I hear people either say, "Oh, he's got a chance, I'm scared," or if people just flat out support him. It's frightening in a sense. It's as if people have just given up. They don't care anymore. And this is not the time we need to be having that kind of mentality. We need strength, and we need assertiveness, and we need people fighting for this. We are literally in a fight for our lives, the very democracy of this country that guarantees our freedom and our futures. I've told people before, as a 64-year-old man, my life is pretty well figured out for the next 20 years up until the time I keel over myself. But I'm truly worried about my kids and my grandkids. And I'm worried about taking responsibility for it too. Because if we don't do something now and we leave our kids, we may be dead, but the reason they will suffer and struggle in the future will be because of us. Because for decades, we've been apathetic. We just stood back and said, well, whatever they do, it's got to be right. If we are going to be apathetic and be put in this position, it's incumbent on us to try to fix the motherfucking thing. You know, it's our responsibility. We put ourselves in this situation, and we need to fix it. Now, not one of us really has the ability to fix the entire thing, but maybe as a group, we can start the groundswell and try to change this situation. Um, it's it's pretty frightening, actually. I can't think of a time in my life. You know, I talk about the 60s and how turbulent it was. It was, but I don't think we were ever at a point where we could lose our democracy. I mean, it was fucked up, it was corrupt, it was criminal. But this is taking it a step further when our very democracy is hanging by a thread. As I've said, I don't want you to think that I'm trying to be a fear monger here, because I don't believe Donald Trump can win. There's nobody that can convince me of it. The smartest guy in the world can't convince me of it, because it's very simple. It's very much the facts and logic. And if you can use that, well, then you can see what I see. I was going to tell you, Steve Bannon continues to try to stay out of jail. He's scheduled to head in July 1st. And once again, Steve Bannon, who's still trying to appeal this thing, which he did and he lost, but he's spinning around like a wet rat here. He wants to get out. Bannon was, of course, convicted of contempt of Congress after he refused to comply with a subpoena from the House J6 committee investigating the Capitol riot. Last week, a judge ordered Bannon, a former White House advisor to Trump, to report to prison at the beginning of next month, July 1. Monday, Bannon will serve his 4 months in prison sentence at a low security federal correctional facility in Danbury, Connecticut. Lawyers for Bannon had hoped he would be sent to a minimum security prison or a club fed facility, but that's not the case. Now, Ellie Honig, who is a legal expert, was asked about the attempt to delay the start of the sentence. He was asked, can I please get a take on what Bannon attorneys said in a filing to the D.C. U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals? Caitlin Collins asked of their efforts to delay the sentence, basically saying that he shouldn't have to go to prison July 1 because he would be behind bars for the 4-month period leading up to the election. They said this would effectively bar Bannon from serving a meaningful advisor and the ongoing national campaign. Do courts care about that? Now, Honig was blunt. He said, nobody cares, he said, and it's not relevant at all. And let me explain to the people why Steve Bannon is out of prison, even at this moment. So he was convicted at a trial people will remember. He was sentenced to 4 months, and then he was given the courtesy of bail pending appeal, which means you get to stay out until your appeal's over, so long as you can show you have a substantial chance of winning on appeal. He's now lost his appeal. Honig went on to say Bannon's only hope is if the full D.C. court or circuit agrees to hear his appeal, but they almost never do that. He went on to say Bannon could ask for the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene, but he said, I think that's an extremely long shot too. Bannon is also scheduled to go on trial in September for state fraud charges in New York and may be held at the infamous Rikers Island jail. He had been indicted on federal charges over the same We Build the Wall scheme, but of course, Trump pardoned him. Now, this is where Steve Bannon fucked up. He could have gone in 2 years ago, done his 4 months, and been done, but he kept putting it off. His ego wouldn't stop him. He kept putting it off, appealing and doing all these things. And now he finds himself forced to go to jail the 4 months leading up to the election, the time when he thinks he might have some input and might have some impact on the election. He won't. He won't do any good. He's a failure in his own right. But now he's pretty much locked himself down and shut himself up for 4 months leading up to the election. And he even said at one point, no jail cell will ever shut my mouth. We'll still keep talking. Well, Steve, I beg to differ. Regardless of if you're going to a maximum security or a minimum security jail, you ain't going to be talking to anybody. And guess what? You're not doing a fucking podcast either. So he's not likely to stay out of jail. We are, 12 to 14 days away from him going to jail. He's going to pack up his little bluey knapsack and go to jail for 4 fucking months, and good riddance. I hope you enjoy the stay. All right. We are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.